I don't know. Here we go. We're away. We're recording.
Shall we? Should we just sort of crack on and stuff? Is that right?
Yeah,
Brilliant.
absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Can you hear me okay?
Very well.
Good.
Yeah, thankfully you're not echoey like sometimes we're getting offices.
No.
Anyway, so I've got my tea, I've got my water.
Excellent.
I shall slurp throughout.
That's fine. That's fine. And presumably you've got your PJ Tips tea.
But not in this mug. Anyway, no, but yes, I have.
Good, good.
My name is PJ Stevens with another PJ Tips podcast on leading business change. The purpose is to invite guests such as Gwen, who we have with us today, who can share practical insights and top tips to help you lead through business change. Today, Gwen's going to, no, we're going to get rid of that one. We're going to start again, something like that. Hi, I'm PJ Stevens with another PJ Tips podcast on leading business change. The purpose is to invite guests who can bring and share practical insights and top tips to help you lead through business change. Today, I welcome Gwen Sterling-Wilkie, a friend of some 20 years, though we may have to narrow that down to 10. Let's be 10, Gwen, and not 10 years off our life. An organisational change expert, author, and in this modern space of leading through change and through Omni-Working, Gwen can be considered expert, and she'll talk about her book later. So I really want to invite Gwen. I really want you to help us understand this current position of work from anywhere, of omni-working, of change that people are getting caught up in. But also, for me, it's off this back of recent news that UK business is struggling with performance and productivity. So two quick ones then. Who are you, importantly, and the purpose of your book?
Okay, so as you so beautifully said, I'm somebody who works alongside business leaders and have done now for over 20 years. And in two ways. One, to help them look at what kind of leadership is needed in this organisation with the changes and the direction that we want to go in. That's the first one. But the second way that I support leaders and organisations is helping them work through what does our new business operating model need to be? And how do we gain insights and input and contributions from as many people in the organisation as possible? So we're not making our decisions isolated from what's really going on the ground, which is often what can happen.
So when we see leaders at the moment, and I use quite an old phrase, there seems to be a lot of people with their knickers in a twist, if you'll excuse the expression, over how to work now. You know, we've got some businesses trying to mandate, come back to the office. Some people are just, it's almost like, free range, go where you like, go forth and wander. The problem is most of it doesn't seem to be working. So what's right for the business? How do you unearth what's right for them at that time?
Yeah, and I think the first thing to say, PJ, is that there is no one single right answer. And I think that's incredibly frustrating for people because we're quite contrary, really, as human beings. We don't like to be too constrained. But if you give people so much freedom, they get a bit lost in it. And what we found in all of the research that I've been doing over the last 12 or 18 months into this topic about the future of work, and it's something that's really got me captivated and has led to the book that I've just written, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But what I discovered was that some organisations, when everything started to open up again at the end of the global pandemic, some organisations said, just organise yourselves, do what it is that you want to do. And in a lot of respects, that was too much freedom for people. It's a bit like the Goldilocks and the porridge. I've got too much freedom and I can't kind of organise myself within that. Some organisations then kind of went almost to the opposite end of the spectrum and said, right, this is what you must do. These are the days you must come into the office. And people went, whoa, this is just too much. Right. We had such a big seismic shift of our lives and how the place of work in our life and all sorts of things happened during the pandemic. And what we've been seeing is that over the last 18 months, there has been this recalibration in every sense and for every organisation. because remote working or flexible working or hybrid working, whatever label you want to give it, isn't new. It's been a long, slow trend way before the pandemic started, driven a lot by technology. And then we've had this massive seismic shift that accelerated it during the pandemic. And so what we're seeing now is organizational leaders are going, well, what does it mean for my organization? How do I make sense of it? How do we all make sense of it? And I think we've been distracted by the where, how often should people come into the office? Should they come into the office at all? And I think that's really distracted us from what is much more important, which is how people work. And that's the stuff about your operating model. That's the stuff about, where is the best way to help people bring the talent that we're recruiting them for, improve the business and generate results. It's about how, not where.
Listen, I'm smiling because you've just prompted just some thinking last year with a client. They really did get stuck. I mean, to some degree, they still are. So,
Right.
a couple of years ago, a situation happened where some people were forced to go home if they could. Some people, however, had to, let's call it the front line. They had to stay on the front line and work because, that's just the way some jobs operate. Okay, you have to stay on the front line. But there was no sort of considered decision. There was no discussion. It had to happen, so it happened. The problem now we've got is this within the business, the client has a low-level conflict, a low-level them and us. It's you went home, I didn't. And now my job still requires me to be on the front line, but you sort of come and go, from your ivory tower, from your head office, you think you're a bit special. And at times there are people on the front line who use that specifically. I'm going to give you a specific example. What they will say is this: when they know a senior person is working from home, they will call them and say, can you pop in and help me with? Knowing damn well they can't. And then they go, ha, you're at home again doing bugger all. How do we unpick that for good? Because you're right, so much time is being wasted.
Yeah.
And this will impact performance. So unpick it for us. What are we going to do?
Well, over the last year, I've been having conversations with leaders in all different kinds of organizations because I got really curious about what was happening. What were leaders doing? What were leaders struggling with? And exactly one of the things that you've talked about surfaced in a conversation that I was having with a construction company. And exactly this, they had done their employee survey and they had got some results back, which pretty much mirrored exactly what you were talking about. On construction sites, we don't have a choice. We can't do our construction work from home, and yet there's this group of people in the office who have this sense of, you can come and go as you please. It wasn't quite as big as that, but that was the sentiment. And they went, okay, we need to look at this really differently. And this is what I mean when we've got really obsessed about kind of in the office or at home from the office, because location flexibility is only one element of multiple things, which is what my Omni-Working framework is about. So in this particular construction company, they then said, okay, well, let's look for the construction sites. Let's look at where we can create different forms of flexibility. And that particularly then is around what we call schedule flexibility. So the flexibility within your diary, within the hours that you work, within, which is very different from location flexibility, but equally, and in some cases more important for people, is about being able to flex the time that they start, the time that they finish, and when they get their work done. So they're going through a series of experiments, and I'm really big about experimenting. And they're going through a series of experiments where they picked a really big construction site and a smaller construction site, said to the site manager, right, let's support you through a process which enables you and your site team to decide how you are going to work and how you're going to create some level of flexibility for people. Because we still have to build this, whatever it is, within time, within budget, to the standard of our customer. But within that, Mr. Site Manager, you work out with your team what flexibility you have an opportunity to generate and work with it. And it's been fascinating, absolutely fascinating, because first of all, and it speaks to an awful lot about leadership paradigms and that kind of power dynamic. So the first question was, have I really got this sense of freedom that you're saying I've got? Can I really make these decisions? Because I'm very used to being told this is how things are going to be done. So that was the first kind of thing which needed to be unpicked. And secondly, was this sense of, right, I've got this freedom. Oh, okay. With it comes a sense of responsibility, because suddenly I'm being given greater autonomy, greater choice. I'm being given a sense of trust. So I have to make this work. So there's a real shift there in responsibility and accountability, which they realized hadn't been as present before. So they're now in the process of testing it out. So they did a series of a section of preparation to get people ready for this, lots of conversations. They're now testing it out. But their view is that this is such a fundamental shift in their operating model that they want to roll it out across the rest of their construction sites and across other parts of their group of businesses, which is construction machinery and other construction related things. So it can be done in other environments. You just have to think about it in a different way.
So my question went, with someone like that, I was going to, I mean, I spend more time, financial services, for example, I'm thinking of that. And historically, there's been quite a lot of male ego in FS. I don't think it's unfair to say that. And a client we worked with a couple of years ago was looking at this notion then of work from anywhere.
Yeah.
But the problem is you got a dozen leaders or so, some of which are perhaps a bit more open to it and some of which really aren't. And I'm in that quite specifically. I like my big office. 1, 2, I like to see people coming into my office. But there's a third element which perhaps you could talk to as a cultural element of where perhaps in some parts of the world it's seen as you're seen as perhaps successful if you go into an office. You have a better job if you're seen to go into an office. How do we manage these dynamics?
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting one because there's a lot kind of nested into that. So I think there's something about the perspective of leaders and leadership. And what I see in organizations, and it's about the research that I've done, it's about a 50-50 split. So some senior leader exec teams view flexible working as a real source of competitive advantage. And so therefore sitting very firmly in their operating strategy. So it's viewed in that way. The other group of organizations view it as kind of an HR benefit or as a perk, something that needs to be agreed and signed up for. So those two perspectives drive behavior, they drive decisions, they drive culture. And so for me, that's a real signal as to where is the mindset of senior leaders in the organization. And from that, you're then going to be impacted on employee engagement. You're then going to be impacted on attracting and retaining good talent. So it's about how important to me is it about my view as being the right view versus actually there may be another way here, which might not be what I'm used to. I might not particularly like it, but if it's driving results and getting performance, then actually do I need to start thinking about doing something differently? And what we're starting to see now is a performance gap emerging between those organizations who really have embraced flexible working and give choice and give autonomy. We're starting now to see performance gaps opening up about improved profitability, about increase in differentials in sales, and certainly in their level of employee engagement, how trusted employees feel. And all of these things are nested together and they all start to gain a sense of momentum. So we're now starting to see a divergence in terms of performance of organizations, which I think is really, really critical. I think we're at a really critical point now for leaders because we've kind of gone through that. Pandemic has sort of is in the rear view mirror, but yet we're still in a place where I call it high performance flexibility. We want high performance, but flexibility now is such a critical element of it. But the right answer will be different for most organizations. And within an organization, you may have multiple right answers depending on the range of things your business does. So it's tough, it's complex, it's not straightforward. And I think in some respects, I can understand why organizational leaders are going, well, let's just do 3 days a week in the office and 2 days from home, because it's a decision made and it's quick and easy. And it feels a little bit like a halfway house, if I'm perfectly honest with you.
No, and I think the bit about halfway, I'm not a fan of halfway anything, because
No.
that tends to me to be, it sort of, it doesn't work. And, this notion of sort of stakeholders, if we ask everybody's opinion, I'm like, it does worry me sometimes. We think we have to ask everybody's opinion. The problem then is if we then try and aggregate that out, you end up with a kind of a nothing. As you say, different parts of the business require different things, and also different times of the year.
Yeah.
Within the operations of the business. But I was reading just before we came on the call, actually, just about I won't name the company. Actually, I don't even know the company, but I won't name the company. They said when it comes to kind of managing work schedules. So I mean, so what they've decided, what the boss has decided, I think the owner's decided, if you live within 20 minutes of work, you come in 4 days a week. 40 minutes, you come in 3 days a week. 60 minutes, 2 days a week, please. 60 minutes plus 1 day a week in the office. Now, what's your thoughts on that? And number one, what's your thoughts on that? Number two is, does office hours equal performance?
I'm going to answer the second
Oh,
question
right.
first with a no.
Oh.
Because I don't believe it does. The organizations who I think are doing this really well have a set of what they call guiding principles. And I think this is a real opportunity for organizations to look at, how do we set some guiding principles which set some boundaries and a framework, and within that, at a local level, whether that is your functional team, so your marketing department, your sales department, your finance department, or a geographic team, set their own set of team agreements, which is local, which is, what do we need to just really fine tune within our team about how we go about working. So at a broader organizational level, the choice that they've made is, okay, we're going to do it based on how far away you live from the office. But I don't believe the office is the only place that gets results, because it isn't. You need to come together for certain things, absolutely. And there are certain things that you're doing which actually need more peace and quiet than might be available in the office. So it's that balance. And I think we really struggle measuring productivity, because traditionally productivity has been measured by input rather than outcomes. And so when you talk to leaders about it, they're worried about, if people aren't physically in the office, how do I know they're being productive? And I often say, well, how did you know they were being productive when they're actually in the office? Because just because they're there, it doesn't mean they're being entirely productive the whole time. So there has to be this element of trust. But when you talk to them, they're kind of going, well, they're looking at a mix of office attendance. They're looking at the speed of response to email or message. They're looking at somebody's online presence. So how often does that little green light come up to show me that they're online? They're looking at contributions in meetings. So somebody can look as if they're very busy, but are they actually producing and delivering what it is that they're there to deliver? Their key deliverables, the objectives and outcomes that feed into the success of us as an organization, given our priorities for this next 6-12 months.
So when we talk about this, I guess this overarching notion of business change, if I can go back to that. So historically, and let's just talk about the UK just for ease of this conversation, we're crap at change. We're crap at leading change. It takes us forever, and it tends not to be successful. Listen, read anybody's website. 80% of change fails. I know it's not that linear. It's not that black and white, because there'll be some successful criteria within that, and some sort of less so. But nonetheless, it all reports that we are not good at it. So, we've spent a couple of years, if we can, perhaps trying to decide how we're going to work. Are we going to waste another couple of years and therefore damage our performance and productivity? So therefore, the question for me is, how can we lead, or how can leaders lead better change in this omni-working space? You know, this,
Yeah.
or perhaps a different question, what's after hybrid? What's next?
I think you've got two things happening because, we haven't spoken about, and this call isn't about us talking about the changes in technology and generative AI and automation driven by AI, because that is going on in parallel with this. And at the moment, that is taking a lot of time and energy and in senior leadership and executive team discussions and meetings, and it has to sit alongside flexible working. So what I think is going to happen is you're going to continue to run these two conversations in parallel, which have got to require a look at operating models and how people work, not where people work. So in some respects, I think the conversations that are going on about generative AI are going to encourage people to broaden out from this topic about where, and then it's got to become much, much more about how. How does this shift in technology affect how we operate? And so for me, this whole change agenda and change initiative in business, there's that, it's a continuous conversation. And if you haven't worked out yet the best way to bring about changing your organization, then now is the time to really start to think about it. Because you either come from the mindset that says, because of our seniority, we know more about what's going on, so therefore we will make the decisions and we will go down this route of mandating, whether that's about where people work, whether that's about how the business is going to be structured. But there's a lot of evidence which says if we can involve more people in that, and not because everybody needs to have an opinion, again, it's where are our boundaries? Over the years, I've done some amazing projects with organizations who have gone, okay, let us give this piece of change work to some of our really high potential leaders in the organization. These are our senior leaders of tomorrow. Let's give them something to really get involved with to help us make these important strategic decisions. It doesn't mean we're going to follow exactly what they say, but it's an opportunity for them to really step up and fulfill the potential that we see in them, and also help us make sure that we are looking at all of the different aspects of this particular change that we can see coming down the line. And we'll have some parameters. We give them a framework within which to operate. We may give them a budget, we may get whatever, go away, and in X period of time, come back and tell us what you found out. Tell us what your recommendations are, and then we can feed that into a decision-making process. But don't do that if you're going to completely ignore whatever is suggested, because there is no surefire way of hitting your engagement scores with ignoring what anybody has suggested, because you may as well not bother, because all you're going to do is upset people even more. So there's a caveat with that.
So I've got a couple of questions that people sent me prior to this call. So these are perhaps just short questions, if you don't mind taking a couple. One is around perhaps the difference between leadership, which is often considered those in authority, and then leaders of teams, hands-on leaders. So leadership, authority, those in authority make a decision, let's call them directors, and then we have the leaders in the business that have to run the business on a day-to-day basis. Do you have any top tips for that level of leadership that have to activate this new way of working?
So for me, I call it, the leaders who make it work, whatever has been decided, mandated, decreed, set up. Now you go and make it work, you go and make it happen. And I think for those leaders, there's two things that I would really encourage them to think about. So how do you make it work? So where is your freedom? Where's your freedom, to act? So what can I do for my team to carve out a space? And I would encourage you to look at something that I call team agreements. Now, that's not necessarily how we're going to talk to each other. We're going to create an environment which is safe and open, and that's important stuff. But this is much more practical, much more operational. It's about meetings. It's about how often do we physically come together? How many meetings do we have? Can we introduce meeting-free days? When do we come together in person? When do we work in a virtual meeting environment? Combine that with how can we shift the way of working to more asynchronous working, and how do we agree when our what I call our open collaboration hours. So when are we all going to be available? You know, PJ, you and I are available between 9 and 10:30, you know, every Monday and Thursday. And that's our open time. We may not need it, but we know that we're going to be available for each other to just kind of have a bit of a chat about, you know, how are you progressing with this? And can you help me with this? So we need to be perhaps a bit more planful and structured than we have done in the past, because it helps me concentrate on the stuff that's really important for me to deliver, where I really don't want to be disturbed. It helps us know when are we going to come together and when are we going to meet up in person. You know, we had coffee earlier on this week. We covered loads and loads of stuff. And that was great. And that's really important, as well as it is being really focused on the work that we're doing together now to generate this podcast. So team agreements is a really helpful way of making stuff work, because it's the localized things, and you can then start to change some of the rituals and habits and behaviors.
Thank you. And that's I think that's another conversation for culture. How do we create a culture to deliver this change? But another couple of questions, which I promised I'd ask. I'm under pressure to ask. A chum of mine, Hannah, she is loosely in HR. Okay, loosely in HR. She wanted to ask a little bit about the human so what human relationships data do you have? Okay, to demonstrate how this will or won't work. She has a specific question that then just says about how can I use relationship data to help retain better people? Right. And then in brackets, how can I wheedle out those that really, you know, they're really not adding to the business. They're not adding to the team. They're not adding value. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So human relationship data can be, you know, at a high level, it can be employee engagement. It can be employee retention. Am I holding on to the good people that I really want to hold on to? So at an organizational level, you know, for me, the relational data is equally as important as the financial performance data. And they should, in my view, be sitting side by side, because one has a slightly longer lead time. So if you're making a massive shift in terms of your operating model, what's the skill set that we need? Are we able to attract that? One of the big important pieces about attraction nowadays is, what's your flexible working policy? That's one of the first things people are asking. And people aren't joining organizations who don't have flexible working policies. So engagement, retention, attraction in terms of recruiting the kind of people that you want, but then also what's happening at a team level, at a manager level, about when I look at the overall employment data, engagement data and retention data, if I then look at that within a department and a function, what does that tell me about what's going on for that particular manager? And I think manager data and manager performance is really, really important at the moment. Their role is so much more complex. They feel overwhelmed. They feel underprepared. There hasn't been a big enough investment in helping them develop the skill set that they need now to lead and manage in this new way across flexible and distributed working teams. And so coming to the second part of that question is to say, well, how do we normally performance manage people? Because in some respects, some of those more difficult conversations are the easy ones to put to one side.
Yeah.
So I think it speaks more about what's the culture of performance management and developmental conversations in your organization, which will tell you whether you need to actually look at the ways and the systems that you do that, as well as be a lot more honest and transparent with people about what you expect from them, where they are reaching that and where they're not reaching that.
It's difficult with middle management, and I say difficult, there are a number of figures I've been, reading recently, depending on which report you read and obviously what criteria
Of
they use.
course.
One said that, poor middle management is costing UK business 86 billion a year. Another, which is a bit outdated, said it could be as much as 220 billion a year. Why then are businesses not investing in that, let's just call it, for discussion's sake, that middle management section?
PJ, that's a really good question. And I don't have an answer for it, because when I look at the impact of good managers can make a massive difference. We know that we join a company, maybe for the culture, maybe for the opportunity. But when you look at all of the exit data, it's because, my manager either micromanaged me. So do they understand? Is it something about their skills and confidence? Or the experience was really awful. The culture, the team environment didn't enable me to fulfill what I saw as the potential of me joining that organization. So managers have a huge impact on trust. They have a huge impact on people's sense of belonging, on autonomy and choice and freedom, which are so important to people, freedom within that framework. So managers are so important. And yet, I don't know the answer to that question. For me, it's a kind of why isn't there the investment being made in really developing managers? Because when that development is done well, then managers really soar, and I've run a lot of both leadership and management development programs, but not what I would call sheep dipping programs. It has to be relevant. It has to be a blend of structured learning with experiential. Now go out and put it into practice and come back, and what have you learned and what can we adjust, and how supported are you to be successful? But I wish I knew the answer to the question of why. Why isn't that investment being made?
That sounds like book number, well, a follow-up book, I'm not sure. Book number 3, of course. I was going to say, I was quickly trying to count how many. Gwen, listen, we need to bring this one to a close. So just prepare, because I'm going to give you the last few words. But it is always an absolute pleasure. And when I joked to her and said I've probably known you 20 years, it probably is. But you've been a great friend and mentor. I have an enormous amount of respect for you, and not just for what you do, but how you do it for the people in your community, which now, of course, is a global community, not just in the UK. So thanks very much for that one. But a couple of quick words. I will put in the I'll put in the briefing that goes with this, details for the book. But just give us a quick one. Who should, why should they read your book? What's the value to them, please?
Okay, so my book was written for leaders and managers in organizations, whether that's somebody who's responsible for setting the strategy or actually making whatever operating model you've got work. It is very practical. It was based on all of the interviews and conversations I had over the last 12 months with leaders and managers. It's called Omni-Working, Work Effectively in All Ways from All Places. There's a website, omni-working.com, which gives you a lot of background information as well. But there's a load of very practical tips, ideas, and insights in the book. And connect with me on LinkedIn, because I'm regularly posting on LinkedIn about this topic that I am enthralled by and finding fascinating and energizing. And I love talking to people about it.
Absolutely brilliant, Gwen. Thanks so much. This has been me, PJ Stevens, with the PJ Tips podcast on leading business change. And I always say, my purpose is to bring real leaders, with genuine, authentic experience, who can offer practical insights and top tips for business leaders to help them lead business change. Gwen, you've knocked it out the park. Thank you so much indeed.
Thanks for the invite. It's been great to talk to you.
Cheers. Bye. Right, we'll cut it there. You rock that, didn't you? I'm just going to turn that off.